fast forward to modernity, if we look at women's rights or the idea of the first wave of feminism, feminism finds its origins in French revolutionary philosophy, which led to the first wave, I should say. French revolutionary philosophy with Mary Wollstonecraft and others posited the idea of absolute equality in society based around the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, all of which were revolutionary at the time and sought to overthrow not just the church and not just the state or the monarchy or a patriarchal society, but all society, all areas of life had to be revolutionized. Since that time, we've had second wave feminism, we've had third wave feminism. Third wave feminism, interestingly, which not many people know, was actually funded by very wealthy, powerful oligarchical elites. In fact, in the Rockefellers' authorized biography, there's an entire chapter on Abby Rockefeller's funding of third wave feminism.
Yeah, I saw all this.
Good for society, but I am sure that
like a job, right? As an example, Proverbs 31 talks about women being able to work, but it's sort of under the purview of the husband. So it's not independence, it's not doing their own thing, it's a family unit working together, so there's roles.
Sure. So when we're thinking about like a job.
Oh, she's ceiling talking. Is this whole thing going to be ceiling talking? It is. I can tell it's going to be ceiling. I find leftists fighting over the Middle East entertaining. It's like watching women argue about cast members' reality shows. Yeah, it's wildly stupid.
So when I think about a monopoly of hard and soft power, in my mind, I'm thinking law, like kind of like men are mostly monopolizing positions in law, but also soft power, like media, and kind of able to kind of set the tone culturally as well. So they kind of have these areas of power mostly fully occupied by men, particularly systems where men force it to be the case that it's only men in those positions.
Yeah, it's just monopoly is a difficult term because it suggests totality, and again, there can be a shared situation here that's not a total monopoly. But
okay.
Fine, I'll go with it. It's fine.
Sure. We can say like a soft monopoly or something like that. Okay. But essentially a hierarchical structure where men tend to mostly occupy positions of power. Okay.
Sure.
Feminism, I define it as the empowerment of women and promotion of femininity. Do you agree with that, or do you have a very different definition of feminism?
I think of it as something necessarily tied to revolution, and I think when you say the word empowerment, it's also ambiguous because that could be a lot of things in different contexts. So I don't know what you think empowerment is.
Okay, so by empowerment, what I mean is typically going to be, I'm a very big freedom of opportunity person, liberal. Guilty as charged. So empowerment would be eroding any obstacles to disadvantages or inabilities to take opportunities that other people would have. That would be one way of empowering someone.
So, for example, there was a TED Talk about 10 years ago, and one of the ladies who was a diehard sort of CEO out of the
husband takes roles, sometimes they get babysitters.
A moral, ethical domain right there.
Sure, there are some moral elements.
So when you make arguments about GDP, if it's not moral, then it's not relevant to the debate.
It's absolutely moral. What language would you like to use? I said it's not. There is moral elements, and there are some non-moral elements. GDP.
Is the debate today about something moral?
I don't know if I agreed to saying we're only going to talk about epistemics and morality. Good is, again, this word that we're basically doing chatter around, where you're assigning a label to it, and I haven't agreed to
it. I'm trying to figure out your position on the good.
My position on the good is it's holistic. There are things that are good because it's functional, and there are things that it's good because it's moral, right?
Is the debate today, feminism, about the good of the moral for society?
It's about, I guess, I would like to make the case for both.
The answer, okay. So
functional
then that means that everything you've been saying for the last hour is wrong.
No, because I'm making a case for the functional element too.
Why do we care about if it functions well or not? It's like, I'm sure, couldn't you make the argument that Aztec society functioned well? Like, it functioned well, but it was also bad, you know? What is the function of this when you say it's working good, right? That you're not meaning that in a moral way. You're just like, well, the machine is not broken, but what if the machine's entire job is to just, smash men in the face over and over and over? That's all it does. You know what I mean? Well, yeah, the machine's working good, but it's like, okay, but what about the claim of what we mean here by good?
But the fact that you're making the case for the functional element too doesn't matter if you're also
it doesn't
talking
matter
about the moral.
You can make
the function doesn't matter. That it has no. There's no. The functionality of the thing has nothing to do with the basis of whether or not it's good or not for society. The fact that it functions, well, it functions. So
both arguments, and I would
Correct.
like to engage in the first one.
Right, because the other one is the one I'm looking at, and that's the problem for you.
It's not the problem for me. The problem with this conversation is that essentially what you've done is you've assigned me a bunch of positions that I don't have.
No.
You've done a bunch of circle talk about words. You've done a couple of rhetorical flashbangs, and now we're stuck.
Now we're doing it. So immediately we're into a meta debate. The meta debate would be a debate about what the debate's about what we've been debating. Here's what. Listen, what's been going on during this debate is X, and it's like so. So you don't need to recap the debate. It's not important.
In the situation where we can't actually talk about the ideas, which is unfortunate because I was really looking forward.
You're chasing. You're like one foot is nailed, and then the other one is going in a circle, like a cartoon. You're like a cartoon character running in a circle.
If you want to like throw Agrippa's trilemma at me, you can.
Agrippa's trilemma. Why is she bringing up Agrippa's trilemma? Did she just recently hear about Agrippa's trilemma? That would not work. That doesn't work against Jay, though, right? Agrippa's trilemma would work on axiomatic claims. Jay refutes axiomatic claims. He thinks that they're just all nonsense, right? He claims he has actual epistemic justification outside of axiomatic justifications, like our arbitrary axiom starting point is Y. He rejects that. So Agrippa's trilemma it means nothing here for him. Literally means nothing. Andrew, big fan. In one of your videos, you recommend The History of Philosophy. Is that by A.C. Greeling? No, it's. I think it's by a guy named Durant, maybe. I don't have it next to me, but I think it's by a guy named Durant. So.
But I can throw it at you too. And if we do that, then there's no point. We're at an impasse. What do you think is good?
The good ultimately relates to God, the highest good.
Okay, the highest good. So is GDP in direction of that or not?
All things that exist are good in some way, and in some way relate to morals. But I do not believe that the GDP is the highest good for society.
Okay, what is the highest good for society?
The health and flourishing of the society, which has to exist within some kind of patriarchal norm. That's the only way that it can function.
Gotcha.
And the ones that don't, they dysfunction.
I tend to agree with that. Do not take a nap before the debate. When you're at your most vulnerable, napping, someone in the home could assault you. Just imagine you could be. It's true. It's true.
Okay. And so in your mind, does GDP contribute to any of that?
It's just one component of life, just like, I don't know, the size of the nation's landmass is one component.
It could be the story of philosophy. I don't remember what it's titled. I don't have it next to me. So
sure. I would agree with that.
But it's not the highest good.
Okay. Gotcha.
So what's the argument that feminism is good for society?
Feminism is good for society at a functional level because it increases innovator scale. I also think it's the right thing to do.
Oh, well, she thinks it's the right thing to do. Okay. As long as you think it's the right thing to do, I guess debate over. I think it's the right thing to do. Well, great. I think it's the wrong thing to do. So it's like, where have we gotten? Where have we gotten here?
That's moral oughts.
Yep. I'm giving you a moral claim now.
Okay. Thank you. And why is it right for society?
It is right for society because I think in general we should try to treat others well, and I think limiting people's opportunity by force is bad for them. I don't think God wants that.
Okay.
God doesn't want that. God does not want people to use force to limit opportunity. What if we limit their opportunity to like have orgies? God doesn't want that. He doesn't like that. He would prefer the orgy rather than some type of force in society preventing orgies. That's what God would want.
What God?
The Christian one.
Okay. Where does he talk about this?
Forcing people to do things?
No, this idea of what the good is for society, because we have a lot of historical Christian societies.
Sure.
Were any of them feminist?
No, but I don't think in
No. No. None of them.
general that God advocates really strongly for a political system.
Really?
No.
What about when Israel was organized? Was that a political system? What did they
Like
have?
in 1948?
No,
No, not in 1948.
in the Old Testament.
In the Old Testament. Was it? Yeah, it was a political society.
How was it organized?
I'm not a Jew.
What does that have to do with whether
Nothing.
it was
It has
organized
nothing
in
to do with
a certain way or
anything.
not?
It has nothing to do with my claim.
What does the Old Testament say about
Yes, it does. It does have to do with your claim. If your claim is that the organization of society is better by God's will because he doesn't want anybody to limit anything, Jake is doing an internal critique where he's saying, well, these original societies that we can see God setting up, were these patriarchies? Were they not? And why is it God set them up this way without all this female participation? That's his whole point. The is this? It doesn't sound like Jay ever accepted her definition of feminism. He just reiterated his position and asked her to further define her magic words. Perhaps. We'll see. What is not so bright's? I don't think so.
how God organized that society?
He gave them prescriptions about how to run their life from Moses.
Now look. So you guys, it's funny, right? It's a whatever podcast. You see two very distinct styles. Okay. And the whatever podcast probably isn't used to this. The Crucible audience probably isn't used to this because I do things the opposite way. I go ahead and grant the position, step inside of it, and completely obliterate it, then replace it with something that makes more sense, right? It's a more keen, communicative way, I think, of getting through to the most amount of people possible. Jay doesn't do that. What Jay does is he obliterates the position for lack of justification before the position can even be contended with. While I think that that's a more effective method overall of destroying an opponent in a debate and winning a debate, right? I also think that it takes a little bit of headroom for an audience to understand what's happening, right? It takes a little bit of headroom for people to get it. Whereas I do a much slower kind of burn up so that people can understand kind of what's going on, right?
Moses.
How was that society organized?
It was organized, I believe, in a patriarchal society
Yes,
with matrilineal
correct.
heritage.
And it was a monarchy.
Well, no, I think at that time it was patrilineal heritage. Became matrilineal, I think, later. I'll have to go confirm, but I don't think. So I think that I don't remember when it became matrilineal. Let me look. When did it actually become matrilineal? Because it was patrilineal for a long time. Let's take a look here. 2nd and 3rd century CE. So let's take a look here. So maybe it was matrilineal at the time. I don't know. Scholars seem to not agree on when exactly it went from patrilineal to matrilineal.
Yes.
A male monarchy.
Yep.
Okay. So in that regard, God was not feminist, right?
I've never said that
I'll
God
look into that some more, though, and see.
was feminist.
Well, I'm asking if there's a history example of where God organized a feminist society.
I mean, it's interesting because when you look at like ancient Judeo history, if you're not being presentist, it was like insanely progressive compared to like the pagans around them, like the Assyrians.
That doesn't mean anything, though. Even if it was the case, that Jay's question precisely is, when were these societies not patriarchal that God set up? And she's like, well, they were very progressive. That doesn't mean. That's not contending with anything.
Assyrians and Babylonians.
That's not what I'm asking.
Well, it is what you're asking.
You're calling
right?
it progressive, and I would just say it's healthy. So the fact that they,
Sure,
had,
yeah, like
they had the Ten
God
Commandments.
seemed to advocate to some degree for a better treatment of women than any other society
I
around
agree.
them.
But that's not feminism.
Correct.
To some degree, you could argue that it is if you agree with my definition, which is like the empowerment.
Well, but your
and
definition is so
promotion of
elastic
femininity.
and broad that it could be anything
But you agreed
except
to
for
it.
what my position is. No, I don't, because I'm not agreeing that Old Testament patriarchal society is feminist. You just admitted it's not.
If you're not agreeing, why did we even define the words at the beginning?
Can
if
you
now you're
name a
just rejecting
feminist
them?
society
I'm not
that
interested
God
to.
advocated?
I'm not interested to.
You appealed to God.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to treat women well.
Did God ever? That's not feminism. Now you're equivocating.
I'm not equivocating.
Yes, you are.
How am I equivocating?
Well, the equivocation here is you're taking the word feminism and you're giving it a different meaning than the meaning that you're trying to pass off as a definition, which is if you're treating women better than pagans, that's feminism. That really has nothing to do with feminism. So that's the equivocation. Don't give them an inch, not one step back. Agreed, not one step back.
Changing moving the goalposts is what feminism is.
That's a completely different
so
fallacy.
if God
So am I
has,
equivocating or am I moving? Hold on.
No, it's not really. The equivocation is that you're using the word and giving it multitudes of meanings when, in switching between the meanings, when it's useful for whatever your argument is. That is definitionally equivocation. Now, if I'm wrong, I'll just say I'm wrong, but I'll look up equivocation here and just make sure. The use of an ambiguous term or phrase within an argument, shifting its meaning to mislead or deceive. So I was absolutely correct, right? And so was Dyer. He was correct here too. That's very classic equivocation.
Am I equivocating or
if-
am I moving the goalpost now?
It's both.
Yeah, you're doing both things at the same time. So, but the equivocation is what's moving the goalpost. He's right. I mean, objectively, Dyer's right here.
It's
You're
both.
equivocating on the word and moving the goalpost to make your position work.
Correct.
So if there's no feminist,
not what
if there's no
equivocating
That's literally what just happened. I just watched you do it. Like he's right. That's literally what just happened.
feminist equivocating on the word,
That's not what equivocating
I know what
means.
equivocation means.
Yes, it is what equivocating means. It's exactly what equivocating means. I'll read it again. The use of an ambiguous term or phrase within an argument, shifting its meaning to mislead or deceive. The equivocation happened when Dyer was asking specifically about whether or not these were feminist societies. And she said, well, I would argue that they are because treating women good is feminist. Well, that's not for the definition that she's giving, right? Jay says it's very elastic. If it's inclusive of all of that, it means that you could basically assign anything to feminism, which is true. So she's moving back and forth between her meanings so that whichever one suits her better in whatever argument she's giving is the one that she's using. That is classic equivocation. By the way, it's the most common debate tactic out there. And that's why semantics is so important. I say this to you guys all the time, right? Semantics are very, very important for this reason, so people can't equivocate.
Yes, it does. It means that two different understandings of a word. You're equivocating on the word.
Correct.
Okay.
Feminism. And you're defining to say that if God in the Old Testament gives women rights, that's feminism. That's not what feminism is. Feminism is a modern movement, post-revolutionary
Then why
philosophy.
did you agree to my definition of feminism?
Well, he's agreeing that that's your definition. Doesn't mean he agrees that that's the definition. This is something that's very classic that gets lost in translation too. I can agree with you how you define a term. Doesn't mean I agree with the definition of the term. I just know what you mean by it. That's it. Doesn't mean I agree that that's what it means. Just what you mean by it. And so a lot of times these lefties, they'll play this game. They learned it from TikTok and from low-tier debaters. Well, they'll make something definitionally true, even though it has nothing to do with the item that we're talking about. So, like, what if Jay Dyer had come in and said, well, what I think patriarchy is every commandment that God gives. You think we ought to follow every commandment God gives, right? Erudite says, sure. And he's like, well, there you go. You're a patriarchist. But is that what patriarchy means? Don't you think she would reject the meaning of patriarchy then? I think she would. And she would have every right to do so, right? Ethan is a combination of Ozempic and whatever Destiny takes.
Because it's so broad that that's fine if you want to defend that against patriarchy, but I'm arguing patriarchy against feminism,
So
and
all
what
you're
you
doing
appeal
now
to
is moving the goalposts
what
by the
you
originally
ap-
agreeing to a
No.
definition of feminism, and now you're saying that can't work anymore because it's defeating my argument.
the Old Testament God and the New Testament God are the same God, and they never institute a feminist society. And women's rights are being made in the image of God, that women are protected now in that status.
What do you mean by
is
a
not
feminist
feminism.
society? What do you mean by a feminist society?
A matriarchal society
I'm
or,
not
a,
advocating
or a
for that.
non-patriarchal society.
I've never advocated for either of these things.
Okay, but feminism.
Well, no, you've definitely advocated for non-patriarchal societies. Like, definitely. If you believe in feminism, you're advocating for a non-patriarchal society. I mean, by any definition she would give of classic feminism, it would have to include that.